All right, well, let's come on to another NASA image from the moon mission, which is supposedly a family photograph on the surface of the Earth, and we have featured this one before.
On the surface of the moon. You said you want to say that again, yeah.
Well, it probably is the surface of the Earth.
Freudian slip.
Yeah, yeah. We showed the famous clip of Andrew Johnson putting his family photograph into the oven along with his dinner. So
here we have a family photograph, and over here we have an oven, and this oven is set to 100 degrees centigrade, and I'm now going to put this photograph in the oven, just cooking some of my dinner, and then I'm going to watch it through the glass. And that you can see that in very short order trying to get a better light, but you'll see it when I open it. This is curling up within seconds, so I think that's a pretty convincing demonstration. And here it is. You can see it there curled up, and that's only at 100 degrees centigrade. That's right, and I'd like to assure viewers I wasn't on the moon when I did that. Yeah.
So just explain why you put your family photograph in the oven with your dinner.
Yeah, well, this was again one that caught my eye because it's a photograph from NASA on the moon, which you can look at based on the physical properties of materials rather than lighting effects. So the claim is that the photograph is on the surface of the moon. If you look up the official sort of temperature of the surface of the moon, the average temperature is 100 degrees centigrade. In sunlight it's probably going to be 170, 180 degrees centigrade, something like that.
So as I said in the last show, it's higher than boiling water on the surface of the moon. Absolutely.
So if you have a piece of photographic paper, an ordinary photographic paper, it does what's called convolution. It convolves, it curls up. So that photograph should be curling up, what we're looking at there, but it's perfectly flat. It's in a plastic bag, which doesn't appear to have been, and if you heat a plastic bag with a hairdryer, you'll see it all starts to scrunch up or at least change shape. We're not seeing any of that with that photograph. That is not on the surface of the moon. End of.
All right, and then we've got another image here of a lunar rover, and there's all kinds of problems with the lunar rovers, which we covered in a previous show. The fact that they don't even fit into the lunar module, there's no tracks showing there, various other problems with the technology. For example, the operating temperature range of the batteries is completely out.
Right.
So there's a lot of problems with the lunar rovers.
That's right. Again, that's worthy of a little bit of study for people to look at the problems in those areas. Yeah, definitely.
And that's just a few of the faked NASA moon images. Let's now look at some of these testing sites on Earth. Let's use the terminology that they use at NASA. They call them a Mars analog site. Now I'm just going to read out what a Mars analog site is. It is a location on Earth where some environmental conditions, geologic features, biological attributes, or combinations thereof may approximate in some specific way those thought to be encountered on Mars, either at present or earlier in the planet's history. Studying such sites leads to new insights into the nature and evolution of Mars, the Earth, and life. So what they're saying is they're looking for places on the Earth which are a bit like what Mars might look like.
Yes, and have similar conditions, you know, with a rocky terrain or, you know, cold temperatures, or very dry, you know, and this sort of thing.
Now, one of these sites is a place called Devon Island, which just so happens to be the largest unpopulated island on Earth. So they're choosing extremely remote places. I'm sure they could find somewhere just as with the same weather conditions, which is a lot easier to access.
Nobody has ever lived on Devon Island.
There's no flights to Devon Island?
No, there's no...
What about ships?
Well, you could sail there, I suppose.
Would you need
they've had to make their own tiny landing strip to get supplies in and out.
In the document, I suggest in the hypothesis why they're choosing these remote sites, and that's so that no one can actually come and photograph the landscapes that they're using for the faked Mars rover images.
Right. Because I mean, these aren't places where you're going to go out for a Sunday afternoon trip, or even on an expedition, you know, with kayaks or whatever. You wouldn't go to these sorts of places.
Even if you had your own helicopter, you'd be hard pushed to get to some of these places. One of them is, well, the one on Devon Island is next to the Horton crater, which is a huge ancient crater.
When I first looked at Devon Island on my laptop screen, with Devon Island filling my laptop screen, Horton crater was a great big red spot, about 6mm across, I would have said. Right in the middle of the screen, absolutely unmissable. And yet when I went back a week later to look closer, they'd changed the pictures, so you now can't see Horton crater. If you have the whole of Devon Island on your computer screen, the crater is now completely invisible. I think they swapped a high altitude summer photograph for a winter photograph when there's a slight covering of snow, so all the red soil and rock thrown up by the impact is no longer visible on Google Earth.
That's also very interesting, because it alleged that the Mars rovers, or at least one of them, is in the Gusev crater in you know, on Mars.
On Mars.
The Opportunity rover, yes, is supposed to be exploring the edge of a 23-kilometre crater on Mars.
Right.
That's a coincidence, isn't it?
So when I read that in your document, I didn't realise that there was an impact crater on Devon Island, or near where this test station was.
Now, obviously, if you're faking the Mars photographs, you need somewhere extremely dry with no vegetation. And practically the first meteorite crater I looked at was this 23-kilometre crater up on Devon Island in the Canadian Arctic. So I just googled, it's called Horton crater, and the third link that came up was NASA testing Mars rovers there. Now they would say, oh well, we have to go to the most Mars-like locations to test our rovers, but I'm not convinced. They'd be better off testing them in the Mojave Desert, you know, right next to where the NASA headquarters are.
Mm-hmm. So of course they would argue that they chose that site specifically because they knew they were going to send it to you know, a cratered area on Mars. Right. That's why they chose that particular site. But you know,
an extremely remote island which they've now surrounded with high-tech listening devices to keep away any unexpected visitors. They've been running, they're called the AMAZE expeditions, AMASE, Arctic Mars Analog Svalbard expeditions, that have been running for about 10 years, I think. And they have been to a few different locations on Svalbard or Spitsbergen. But they usually seem to head towards a place called Bokfjorden, and also Woodfjorden, which are also in what they call this Arctic desert region. It doesn't actually get very much snow at all. It's Woodfjorden in particular looks almost completely dry, certainly on Google Earth.
We've got other sites, one in Utah, which, if you look at these photographs of the Mars analogues, as they call them, it does look very much like the photographs that they've been sending back, both on Devon Island and in the Utah one. And if you go on to, because we're going to come on to the Mars Society in a moment.
Oh yeah.
And these Mars analog sites, what they do is they get sort of a cylindrical tin can type building, and they'll install it in the middle of the desert in Utah or up in Devon Island, and it has a few stories in it, and scientists will live there for months on end because it simulates a landed spacecraft that they're living in, right? And scientists actually compete to have a go in it, right? To live in it for sort of months at a time, and they get these awards for so apparently it's very, very prestigious for someone studying universities to get their PhD who live in this tin can for 6 months in the middle of nowhere, and they actually get awards for it. You know, great.
Yeah. Whatever floats your boat, I suppose.
Yeah, it takes all sorts to make a world, doesn't it?
It does indeed.
So tell us, where do you think Curiosity rover actually is in reality?
The Curiosity rover has definitely passed several walrus graveyards, in my opinion. which means it's most likely on Svalbard, or it could also be on Bear Island, which is between Svalbard and Norway, which also has walrus graveyards and is relatively flat.
What about the lemming image though? Is that, because that's...
Well, they're using CGI to join together various locations. Like I was saying, they can have they have to have one location in the foreground that they can use their robotic arm to microscopically examine, but they can have a completely different part of the world, or even just CGI in the background. Some of the hills look distinctly unreal. The Spirit rover seems to have been done almost entirely on Devon Island, I'd say.
Right.
The
Curiosity, you think, is more likely to be Svalbard? Is that what you're saying?
The Curiosity rover, I think they've used bits of Svalbard and a lot of the Atacama Desert.
Right. So let's assume that the hypothesis is correct. I would imagine the best way to expose this conspiracy is for somebody to find where these landscapes have been filmed and photograph them and compare them, so we can be absolutely sure and absolutely categoric of which landscapes they've used. Would you go along with that, Douglas?
Yeah, absolutely. But what I found out fairly quickly was that, of course, they've been very, very careful to use locations that can't quite be identified. So even if there are any identifiable hills in the background, they'll use CGI to put something really indistinct in the background. In fact, that's the kind of the distinctive feature I've noticed of all the photographs, is the lack of distinctive features in the background.
Right, but perhaps, as we've seen with the fossils, the lemming, the vertebrae, sometimes they do slip through the net. So maybe we can set a challenge, the Richplanet Find Mars on Earth challenge, to any budding explorers out there who might happen to have their own seafaring vessel or helicopter or light aircraft, who maybe want to try and find where some of these sites are and provide documented evidence